Picture yourself standing in the middle of a mountain hollow in eastern Kentucky, watching a 70-year-old woman pull a root from the soil, rinse it in creek water, and describe exactly what it treats, exactly how to prepare it, and exactly how long it takes to work. No prescription pad, no waiting room, no pharmacy, 3 counties over. She learned this from her mother, and her mother learned it from hers, and somewhere in that unbroken chain of women, passing root knowledge through hollow after hollow, something got preserved that the rest of the country quietly lost. There is one specific preparation inside that tradition that modern pharmacology has never formally studied, never named, and never brought to market. A plant-based compound used for generations in Appalachian households that does something the commercial pharmaceutical industry has no equivalent for, at a price point under $2. The full details on that preparation are coming, but first you need to understand why it came so close to disappearing entirely. Here is what mountain medicine actually looked like before anyone could drive to a pharmacy. In the early 20th century, professional medical care was essentially absent from the hills and hollows of eastern Kentucky, and the word absent is doing real work in that sentence, because the situation was not scarcity in any familiar sense. For every 100,000 live births in rural America during that period, over 800 women did not survive the process, and the infant mortality rate tracked alongside it in a way that made death feel less like a distant risk and more like a permanent neighbor. Into that gap stepped a system of knowledge that had been accumulating for well over a century. Scots-Irish settlers carried European herbal traditions into the mountains. Cherokee and Shawnee communities contributed plant knowledge refined across thousands of years, and African-American healers added a third strand of botanical and spiritual practice that deepened the whole system. What emerged from that blending was not random guesswork. Generation after generation field-tested these remedies, tracked outcomes, and adjusted. The practitioners who carried this knowledge had names: granny women, yarb doctors, conjure doctors. They moved on foot and horseback across terrain that would not see a paved road for decades, carrying no bags of pills, only what they knew. The pharmaceutical industry would prefer you to understand that era as a medical dark age, a period of dangerous improvisation that trained science eventually replaced. That framing is convenient, and it is also incomplete. When researchers applied formal analysis to Appalachian folk plants, they found that 75% contained properties directly appropriate to the traditional belief about what those plants treated. The remaining 25%, while not what practitioners originally believed, turned out to be pharmacologically active for something else entirely. 75% accuracy, built without laboratories, without funding, without peer review, using nothing but observation and the weight of consequence. The difference is what those women had at stake with every decision. The difference is that every incorrect remedy carried a cost the practitioner witnessed personally in the same hollow where she lived. The difference is that a century of that feedback loop produced a working pharmacopoeia that researchers in West Virginia are only now beginning to formally catalog, and the delay is not an accident. Here is where the story gets uncomfortable. Mary Breckinridge arrived in Leslie County, Kentucky in 1925 and founded the Frontier Nursing Service after losing her own 2 children and spending years documenting conditions on horseback across 3 counties. Her survey of local midwives became a formal record. She did not romanticize what she found, describing certain folk practices as medieval and building a service designed to replace improvised care with trained nurse midwives. What her own records ultimately showed, though, is the part that tends to get left out of the official version. Out of roughly 20,000 births that the Frontier Nursing Service assisted from its founding through the following decades, the infant mortality rate was consistently below state and national averages. That result came from a model built almost entirely without physicians, with nurse midwives operating on horseback across conditions that a hospital administrator would classify as impossible, and outperforming the national standard while doing it. The formal medical establishment studied that outcome and concluded that professionalized midwifery was the explanation. The plant knowledge, the granny women, The generation held remedies. Those were reclassified as background noise to be phased out. In 1977, a National Geographic Society monograph on Appalachian medicine identified the mountain region as one of America's leading herb-using and distributing areas, with the author documenting that knowledge still intact, still in practice, still producing outcomes. The monograph did not generate federal research funding. It generated one citation in a herbalism bibliography, and then decades of quiet shelf life. Read that outcome and ask yourself who exactly was being protected by the silence. The pharmaceutical industry had, by the late 20th century, built a distribution chain reaching even the most remote Appalachian communities, with drugstores in county seats, clinics structured around prescribing, and insurance frameworks that reimbursed pills and provided nothing for plants. The system was not designed to eliminate folk medicine outright. It was designed to make folk medicine economically irrelevant, which produced the same result at a fraction of the controversy. Now, if you are thinking that any of this only applies to someone who grew up with this knowledge already in the family, stay with me, because this next section is specifically for you. None of what follows requires 5 generations of mountain heritage. Most of the core remedies of Appalachian folk medicine rely on plants that grow in every American climate zone, or that you can order dried for under $10 a pound, and a standard weekend afternoon is all the time investment needed to begin. Plantain. Leaf is a practical starting point, and there is a good chance it is growing in your lawn right now. Native tribes called it white man's footprint because it spread wherever settlers walked, and the remedy requires nothing more than pressing a bruised fresh leaf against a bee sting or insect bite where it draws inflammation within minutes. Cost: nothing. Time: 30 seconds and 1 leaf. Elderberry is equally accessible, with dried elder flowers available at most farm supply stores for $8 to $12 a pound. Simmer 1 tablespoon of dried flour in 2 cups of water for 15 minutes, strain it, let it cool, and the resulting preparation mirrors what Appalachian communities used for respiratory symptoms across generations. A batch made on Sunday afternoon keeps refrigerated for 4 days. Slippery elm bark, available at most health food stores for $9 to $14 per 4 ounces, served as the primary Appalachian remedy for digestive inflammation, sore throats, and respiratory congestion, and using it requires only mixing 1 teaspoon of the powder into warm water or broth. The mucilage coats irritated tissue on contact. None of these preparations require a permit, a contractor, a prescription, or any specialized equipment beyond what any kitchen already contains. They require $10, 45 minutes, and the willingness to trust a system that worked for 200 years before anyone tried to replace it. Here is something else that most people do not know. By the 1800s, Appalachian hunters were exporting ginseng, locally called sang, to China. Not importing from Asia, exporting to Asia. Chinese buyers understood exactly what American ginseng contained and paid accordingly, which meant that the same root that mountain healers pressed into tea for endurance and recovery was crossing the Pacific as a commercial commodity, while the formal American medical establishment was still debating whether plants constituted real medicine. Bloodroot followed a similar arc, used topically across Appalachian communities for skin conditions for generations, before eventually appearing in commercial toothpaste formulations. After the mad cow disease crisis in Europe, a German animal feed company sought it out specifically, having independently identified its antimicrobial properties through their own research channels. The compound that mountain women had applied to wounds and infections for generations turned out to be commercially valuable enough to attract a European pharmaceutical supply chain, and the community that preserved that knowledge across 2 centuries of poverty and isolation received no credit, no royalty, and no acknowledgement. That pattern repeated itself across the entire tradition. Appalachian plant knowledge gets quietly verified, then quietly extracted, with the source community treated as irrelevant, once the useful compound has been identified. That is not coincidence, and calling it extraction is not an overstatement. The preparation I promised you at the start of this video comes from a specific documented source, and the named witness who confirmed its details is Phyllis D. Light, one of the last living practitioners of Southern and Appalachian folk medicine, who has studied and practiced in this tradition for over 30 years. Her records circulate in traditional herbalism communities and have been largely ignored by formal botanical libraries, which is itself a data point worth sitting with. The document you should know about is the Frontier Nursing Service Quarterly Bulletin, published from 1925 onward by the Frontier Nursing Service in Leslie County, Kentucky. The field reports from the 1930s and the 1940s document individual plant remedies used alongside nurse midwife care, recorded by trained observers with clinical backgrounds. These are not folklore collections. They are clinical field notes from a functioning medical service sitting in an archive in Kentucky, and most people who cite Appalachian folk medicine as a subject have never read them. Now here is the specific preparation that almost nobody outside traditional Appalachian herbalism communities carries. Black Cohosh root, prepared not as the standardized commercial extract sold in supplement stores, but as a full root decoction using the traditional Appalachian method, which means simmering the root for a minimum of 40 minutes rather than the standard 20, and combining it specifically with Skullcap, a plant in the mint family. Cherokee healers used black cohosh for muscular pain and respiratory complaints. European settlers adopted it for female reproductive health, and the Appalachian granny tradition took both uses and added a third by combining it with Skullcap for something more specific. Anxiety-driven physical symptoms, tension headaches, and the kind of whole-body distress that presents as physical illness, but originates in the nervous system. The combination works because Skullcap potentiates the muscle-relaxing properties of black cohosh while independently addressing the nervous system component, which meant the preparation handled both the physical expression of the problem and its underlying source simultaneously. Commercial black cohosh supplements do not include Skullcap. They do not use a 40-minute decoction. They use a standardized extract optimized for shelf stability and a health claim narrow enough to pass regulatory review. The traditional preparation, the one that worked, got replaced by a product designed around what could be sold rather than what was effective. The ingredient is Skullcap. The preparation detail is 40 minutes. Both of those facts have been sitting in Appalachian kitchens since before any supplement company existed. Now, here is the honesty. Black cohosh is not appropriate for everyone, and that matters. Women who are pregnant should not use it, and anyone on blood pressure medication should consult before starting. The traditional Appalachian practitioners who used this preparation knew their patients personally and tracked contraindications through the same feedback mechanism that taught them what worked in the first place. Without that accumulated context, the responsibility for screening falls to you. The mainstream medical argument against folk medicine is not entirely wrong when it targets contamination risk, inconsistent dosing, and the absence of interaction screening. Those are real concerns worth taking seriously. The rebuttal is not to dismiss them, but to point out that the commercial pharmaceutical system, with its full regulatory infrastructure, has produced contaminated batches, undisclosed interactions, and dosing errors at industrial scale. The problems the industry assigns exclusively to folk medicine exist inside the regulated system as well, and the difference is the size of the marketing budget available to manage the story afterward. Appalachian plant medicine deserves formal scientific study, and as of 2024, researchers at the West Virginia School of Osteopathic Medicine received state grant funding specifically to investigate traditional Appalachian remedies for modern probiotic development. The lead researcher, Dr. Matthew Williams, noted that the best candidate probiotic strains were consistently coming off plants already identified in the folk medicine tradition. The science is catching up. It is simply 200 years behind the observation, and that gap did not happen by accident. Stepping back and seeing the full picture of what this tradition represents, the clearest way to describe it is knowledge built by necessity, refined by consequence and preserved by people who had no institutional support and no commercial incentive that outlasted everything the 20th century built to replace it. The settlers who carried European herbal practice into the mountains were gone within a generation. The Cherokee and Shawnee communities who contributed plant knowledge were systematically displaced from the land where those plants grew. The African American healers who wove a third strand into this tradition faced every barrier the American South constructed against them. And the knowledge survived anyway, carried in the hands of women who walked hollow to hollow, passed orally from grandmother to granddaughter, and recorded by a nurse on horseback in 1938 in a quarterly bulletin that no medical school has assigned in decades. That is not a romantic story about the past. It is a documented, outcome-verified, field-tested system of care that the commercial health industry absorbed what it could patent and discarded everything it could not. The resource worth your time is the archived Frontier Nursing Service quarterly bulletins, available through the University of Kentucky Special Collections and digital programs, where the records from the 1930s and 1940s have been digitized and are available free of charge. These are the primary source materials that most modern herbalism books simplify past recognition, and reading the originals is a different experience entirely. If you are the kind of person who believes that real knowledge has been quietly buried to protect someone else's market, and that the communities who preserved it through generations of hardship deserve to have it recovered and put back into use, you already know what to do, and the subscribe button is right there. Next video, the focus shifts to Appalachian water remedies, specifically how mountain communities treated contaminated water sources using mineral and plant methods long before any municipal system reached them. There is one mineral compound in that process that appears in only a single county health record from 1931, and modern homestead filtration guides leave it out entirely, which is exactly why most attempts at off-grid water treatment fall short. Subscribe now so that video reaches you when it goes up. Tell me in the comments what the oldest remedy in your family is. A plant name, a preparation, a specific condition it addressed, any detail you remember. Every comment gets read, and this audience carries knowledge that has never been indexed anywhere online, so put it in the comments and keep it from disappearing.